So, as always, a little backstory to set the scene. I work organizing private travel for ultra-high net worth individuals, generally focusing on European travel. About a month ago, I handed in my 2-month notice as I'd found a new role elsewhere after 2.5 years of dealing with my narcissistic manager's constant, passive-aggressive needling and bullying. Quick introduction to the characters in the story. Narcissistic boss, we shall call Napoleon. I'm sure you can make the connection there. We'll call the client Dingo. So, as mentioned, a couple of weeks back, I handed in my 2-month notice to leave the company. One of the first things Napoleon asked me to do was to put together a full handover of my client list with a bit of an explanation of their likes and dislikes, regular routes, example, margins for flights, etc. As I'm moving to a completely different industry, this was absolutely fine and gave me something to do. This handover went unacknowledged for about 4 weeks, while I wrapped my stuff up and spent a lot of time sitting around doing sod all. Wednesday this week, Napoleon decides, right, let's go and decide who gets which of OP's clients then. He then tells me, you don't need to come up, stay here and man the phones. I had 3 flights that were already booked months ago that would be operating after I had officially left the company, so these were essentially free money towards targets for whoever gets to deal with them at the start of next year. Napoleon, being a narcissist and a greedy man, decides that the 2 flights with the biggest margin he'd take for himself and screw everyone else. However, had he had me in the meeting to discuss the clients, he would have known that I was in the middle of a fairly difficult discussion with client Dingo over a flight to a certain alpine resort at the end of December. Essentially, we had been told that there was no landing options for the requested airport, and they would have to use a different airport about 45 minutes drive further away. He'd chosen the original one as his kids get carsick, so he wanted to cut down the drive time. I'd been going back and forth with the aircraft owner trying to find a solution, and while they were up in the meeting, eventually broke the bad news to Dingo, but advised that we would offer him money off a future flight, and therefore cutting our margin, as an apology. Dingo did not like this and responded with a scathing email advising us of how awful this all was and how he was considering canceling the flight, and he'd think about the options that I provided him and get back to me later that day. Cue the malicious compliance. Napoleon comes down from the meeting and advises, I'll be looking after Dingo and XX other clients from now on for you. So I thought, brilliant. If he wants the margin and doesn't want to bother to get the background, he can deal with the fallout. So I send over an email to Dingo saying, I'm so sorry for all the issues that you've faced with this, and I understand how disappointed you are. Please note I have escalated this directly to my manager Napoleon, who will now be dealing with this all personally from this point forward. When Napoleon saw this, he responded, what are you doing? You don't leave for another 2 weeks. To which I respond, you asked me to hand things over and advised that you'd be dealing with Dingo, so I've handed Dingo over to you as requested. Any information you need is in the handover. I gave you a couple of weeks ago, as clearly you don't need any more information. Napoleon lost it a bit with me and then had to spend the next 2 days groveling to Dingo, dealing with a very difficult operator and knowing that if he'd thought for a second, maybe it might be useful to have him up there to talk us through the clients, then he wouldn't have to be dealing with this. While I washed my hands of what was becoming a fairly stressful situation and went back to doing various pointless busy work as I worked out my notice, I work in healthcare where phones are not to be used while on the floor caring for patients, etc., for privacy, WHS reasons, which is fine and understandable. Most of us have our phones on us or in the break room, and don't use them unless on break or away from patient care areas. None of us check our phones while busy, and if we do, we will always get called out for it by other staff. We were all recently in a meeting where we were told we are no longer allowed to have our phones on us, as it is a distraction and against policy, meaning not to be used unless we are out of the unit or off hospital grounds. A few people piped up and said they had young kids in care where their phone was the direct communication for the carers, or there are issues at home that they needed to have their phone to have quick contact if needed, even if it was left in their handbag and could be checked on breaks. Not only that, but we have a half-hour unpaid lunch break where we should be able to use our phones as we see fit, but this was also denied as it's still in a healthcare setting and could cause WHS issues. Now I know working in healthcare and personal mobile phones don't mix as it really is against policy. However, the issue with denying us complete access was a total overreaction. The issues with requiring quick and direct contact with home or other outside work contacts were brushed off, and we were told if the issues were that bad at home, we shouldn't be at work. Many people were a bit taken aback by this, saying a lot of the home issues are resolved by a quick text back, and not allowing us access to our phones while at work was a bit unreasonable. Our manager said if that is the case, we can give people her direct work number and for contact to go through her, and she will relay the message to us or give the phone to us to talk to whoever is calling. So, cue malicious compliance. We all gave our home, spouses, carers, schools, etc. the direct work line to call for any reason if they are unable to get in contact with us directly, and the phone started ringing continuously. First was a lady whose husband needed approval for a big financial decision at home. The next was a vet calling to tell a coworker their dog needed to be put down. I got a call from my children's daycare saying my son had been bitten and was bleeding, mandatory reporting policy. There were several other phone calls within the span of a few hours with my manager running to find us to relay messages or pull us off the floor so we could speak to the callers, wasting more time than if we were allowed to shoot through a quick text or take a quick phone call while on our breaks. The next day, we were told we can have access to our phones while on break and to please tell our home contacts to stop calling the manager's phone. It took a few days for everyone to get the message, meaning there were still many unnecessary calls coming through, but it made it obvious that the need for communication lines to be open at home was important. I was reminded of this while reminiscing with a former roommate tonight. I was a 17-year-old college freshman. My friend's mother was good friends with Mrs. V. Mrs. V hired a friend and I to be live-in nannies for her little one. We were given a lovely suite to live in. Their home was palatial and gorgeous. It was my friend and I's first time living on our own. We were paid any hours we watched the little ones as well. It was a dream job. Mrs. V was lovely, the little ones were sweet, but Mr. V was a jerk to everyone. Near the holidays, Mrs. V took the little ones to visit her family. They lived far away in another state. They would be gone for weeks. Mr. V did not go. He stayed home. Mrs. V had made it clear to my friend and I that we were not to do any chores, cleaning, or cooking for him. I have a feeling that there had been nannies before us. Soon after Mrs. V left, he came into our suite. My friend was gone at this time. Mr. V told me I was going to do his laundry. I told him what his wife had said. No chores. I don't care what she said. You are going to do my laundry. I offered to take it to the dry cleaners. No, you are going to do my laundry. I offered to pay the dry cleaners. No, you are going to do my laundry. Yes, sir, I said, smiling. I will do your laundry. Mr. V told me he would leave his clothes next to the washer and dryer. The next morning, after Mr. V had left for work, I went to their part of the house, carefully threw Mr. V's cashmere sweater, cashmere socks, wool trousers, crisp button-up on hot in the washer. Then I dumped an entire 15-milliliter bottle of my favorite patchouli oil in. I threw the load on high heat to dry and folded the shrunken, misshapen clothes and left them on the dryer. This was before cell phone times, so I hand-wrote a nice letter to Mrs. V informing her I was moving out. Mr. V never ordered my friend for anything after this and kept his distance. I hope he learned not to screw with the help, though. Mrs. V is a well-known elected official in our area. She is still just as lovely as ever. It was a typical Friday night, and I was out with my friends, enjoying the nightlife of the city. We had chosen a popular bar, and we were having a great time chatting and catching up over a few drinks. Suddenly, I heard a commotion at the bar, and I turned to see a woman shouting at the bartender. She was tall, with long blonde hair and a scowl on her face. It was clear that she was an entitled person, and she was not happy about something. I decided to eavesdrop on the conversation, and I overheard the woman demanding a free drink because she had to wait too long. The bartender was explaining that it was a busy night and that he was doing his best to keep up with the orders, but the entitled woman was having none of it. "I demand to speak to your manager," she said, her voice dripping with entitlement. The bartender rolled his eyes and went to get his manager, who approached the woman with a professional smile on his face. "How can I assist you?" he asked. "This bartender is not doing his job. I demand a free drink for the inconvenience," she said, crossing her arms. The manager looked at the bartender, who shrugged his shoulders. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't give you a free drink just because you had to wait. We're doing the best we can to keep up with the orders," he said. The entitled woman huffed and looked around the bar. Her eyes settled on our table, and she marched over to us. "Excuse me," she said, interrupting our conversation. "Can I speak to you for a moment?" We looked at each other, confused, but we nodded, and she sat down at our table. "I demand that one of you buy me a drink," she said, pointing at me. I was taken aback. "Excuse me, why would I buy you a drink?" "Because you look like you have money, and I'm entitled to a free drink for the inconvenience I've had to endure," she said with a smirk on her face. I rolled my eyes. "I'm not going to buy you a drink just because you're entitled. You'll have to pay for your own drinks like everyone else." She scowled at me. "I don't have to pay for anything. I'm entitled to what I want." My friends and I looked at each other, unsure of what to do. The entitled woman was clearly not going to leave us alone until she got what she wanted. "Listen, lady, we're not going to buy you a drink. You can either pay for it yourself or leave." She stood up, knocking over a chair in the process. She was clearly drunk. "You cheap witch!" "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my distance. "I want what's mine," she said, reaching out to grab my purse. I pulled back, but she was strong, and she managed to grab hold of it. I struggled with her, but she was determined, and she wouldn't let go. "Give me my drink!" she shouted, her voice becoming more and more frantic. I realized that she wasn't going to stop until she got what she wanted, so I decided to take matters into my own hands. I raised my voice and started shouting for help, hoping that someone would hear me and come to my aid. Fortunately, the bouncer heard my cries for help and came to my rescue. He was a tall, muscular man, and he quickly assessed the situation and stepped in to help me. "Let go of her purse," he shouted, pushing the entitled woman away from me. She stumbled backwards and fell to the ground. "You'll regret this," she yelled, before running away. I was shaken, but I was grateful that this drunk lady left at last. After that incident, I never saw the entitled woman again, but I heard stories about her from other people in the city. It seemed that she had a reputation for causing trouble wherever she went, and that many people had encountered her entitled behavior.